Hi, everybody. This is Dale Branda from Stewart Advisors, and welcome to today's webinar where we're going to be offering tips for finding financial success in your 30s and 40s. This webinar is part of an ongoing series that covers a variety of topics of interest to our clients and friends of the firm. So keep an eye on our website, stewartadvisors.com, for upcoming topics. Today's session is a little bit unusual in that we're covering a specific life stage, early to mid-career. We think those of you who are at that point in life have some unique opportunities and some big challenges. And we think there are some tips that you might find especially useful. We intend to cover a lot of information in the next 20 or 30 minutes. After that, we're happy to take questions from anybody who wants to stay on the line. So for those of you who submitted questions at the time you registered, we've either tried to build them into the presentation content, or we'll be sure to address them in the Q&A at the end. You can submit a new question anytime by using the Q&A button on your toolbar. To help with today's presentation, I'm joined by my colleague, Tim Obendorf. Tim's a veteran financial planner, and he's worked with individuals at all different stages of life and career, so he's well positioned to talk us through this material. And as we get started, you should know that the material in our presentation today is backed up by data and lots of experience across the financial planning industry. But we also hope it reflects our approach to financial planning. As you can see from the slide, Stewart Advisors offers a range of services to help individuals and families achieve their goals and make wise financial choices. But we also think those choices and goals should reflect each individual's values. So we spend a lot of time getting to know clients and using the various tools to help clarify what financial success means to each individual and what's important to them. So as we go through the 10 tips that follow, consider how you can apply them specifically to goals that matter to you. So with that said, let me turn things over to Tim.
Thank you, Dale. To set the stage, let's take a look at how most Americans are doing with their finances. So Fidelity recently did a study, and their study showed that by age 35, you should have already saved twice your current salary for retirement. But 1 in 5, or 21% of Americans, have no retirement savings at all. And only a third of Americans are saving money in an employer-sponsored or tax-deferred retirement account. And only 18% of Americans actively contribute to an IRA, and 25% of people who don't have an IRA said they simply don't know enough about these accounts. So these particular statistics are focused on retirement, but other financial statistics aren't much better. The goal today is to give some concrete steps for you to avoid being a financial statistic. Over the next few minutes, we're going to review the 10 steps you see here. And while we think it makes sense to tackle these steps in order, the reality is that you may circle through several of these steps multiple times. For instance, step 1, building a plan, is really never done. As your life situation changes and you accomplish goals, you're going to want to update and adjust your plan and review how you're doing relative to what you planned. The fact that you're participating in this webinar is a great indicator that you want to improve your financial well-being. The sad reality is that 43% of American households practice limited or no financial planning. The good news is that a little bit of planning can go a long way toward improving your financial well-being. Let's talk about what we mean by planning. A comprehensive plan ties your financial decisions to your goals, dreams, and milestones. Your plan should start with the end in mind and work backwards to see what you'll need to save. You'll want to identify your current resources and future income. By incorporating these facts into a financial model, you can even evaluate the options and make decisions to help you get there. The plan should feature a system to measure and track your progress. And as your situation changes, you'll want to adjust your plan to enjoy potential extra resources you might come into or to avoid a spending crisis. Starting with the end in mind, let's take a look at how much you might need to save to have a successful retirement. Back in the early 1990s, a financial planner named Bill Bengen did a study to understand the maximum amount you could withdraw from a portfolio of 60% stocks and 40% bonds over 30 years and not run out of money. Based on market data going back into the early 1900s, he found that you could withdraw 4% of the beginning value of a portfolio and increase that by inflation every year. And you'd have enough money in 90% of the time periods that he looked at. And that's commonly known as the 4% rule. Some planners are a little more conservative and use a 3% rule to account for longer retirements and the possibility of worse than expected market returns. So if you use 3%, a $1 million portfolio would provide $30,000 a year in income. Flipping that around, a 40-year-old would need to save $800 per month to accumulate $1 million by age 65.
Now, once you've committed to building a financial plan, one of the early steps will be simply to stop borrowing. This means to stop spending what you don't have. And we'll get to paying down debt in a minute, but you'll first need to stop increasing your debt. And in our view, the only exceptions to this rule are in the areas of mortgage financing to purchase a home or education loans. While this may be a significant lifestyle change, you'll quickly find that paying cash will make you think twice about buying things that you may not really need. I'm guessing that most of you listening don't like budgeting. Over the years, I've informally polled people about their interest in budgeting and find about 80% of people would rather go to the dentist than work on a budget. On the other hand, if I was going to ask you if you like to have control over your life, I'm guessing that about 80% of you would say yes. Budgeting is merely a method to decide where to spend your money before you actually spend it. So it's a way to control your finances. And a first step to budgeting is tracking where you already spend your money. When I had my first job, I didn't track my spending for the first 6 to 12 months. And when I finally got around to doing that, I found that I was taking large amounts of cash out of the ATM every month. And I really couldn't account for where I was spending it. Merely by tracking my spending, I became much more careful about how much cash I pulled out of the ATM. In fact, I probably reduced that amount by about 50%. The second point I want to make about budgeting is that it's a chance to make your money follow your priorities. You get to choose where you spend your money. You know, is it going to be on that new car, the next house, retirement, or vacation? And finally, I recommend keeping your budget simple. Don't make it such a complicated task that you never get to it. There's a lot of tools out there like Quicken or Mint, or even just use an Excel spreadsheet. I've noticed several financial institutions recently have introduced budgeting tools like Mint, but they are much more streamlined and don't have the ads. So take advantage of tools to make it simple. Budgeting is the building block on which you achieve your other financial goals. And for many of us, one of the big goals is paying down debt. So I know what you're thinking. You'd like to pay down debt, but you've got other constraints. And the solution is simple, but it's hard. You need to stick to your budget. And of course, you need to make required minimum payments on your loans over time as you come into extra cash flow. Consider splitting that between paying down your debt and saving for future goals like retirement. And we recommend that you pay off your high interest rate loans first. And another pro tip we'd suggest is to consider using a 15-year mortgage the next time you purchase a home. So your interest rate will be lower and much more of your monthly payment will go to pay down the principal. One popular approach to paying down debt is called the debt snowball. And this is a method to build momentum as you pay down your debts. So the first step is listing out all your loans. And there's various calculators out there. We're showing one from nerdwallet.com. But the idea is make a list of all your loans and then choose the smallest loan or the highest interest loan and pay a little extra each month. So you need to already make sure you're paying the minimums, but choose one loan and pay a little extra each month. And when that loan's paid off, take the extra cash that you were paying on that loan and apply it to the next highest interest loan. And so over time, this will quickly reduce the number of loans you have out there and snowball and create a fast way to pay down your debt. And obviously don't borrow more money. And one of the ways to do this is commit now to purchasing your next car with cash. One thing that'll do is when you're evaluating, do you want to get that premium package on the car, rather than just thinking about it in terms of the extra $100 a month in the monthly payment, which may not be that big a deal. If you're paying cash for that car, that premium package might mean you have to spend an extra $10,000 of cash out of pocket when you make the purchase. And when you think about it that way, you might really say, I don't need that premium package, and I can get by with just the basics on the car. One thing I'll point out here is to beware of debt consolidation loans. Often debt consolidation loans, while they might reduce your monthly payment, they may on average increase your interest rate you're paying. Or the other thing it can do, especially with student loans, is it may mean that you give up some special features like income-based repayment plans. And when you do pay off your last debt, have a party, celebrate it. Obviously don't spend too much on that party, but it's a big deal to pay off your debts. Once you've begun to tackle your debts, you'll also want to build up a cushion so you don't have to borrow more money for a future emergency. And it's really hard to pay down debt, so having to borrow to fund an emergency can be a big emotional setback. Here we've listed some of the typical emergencies, job loss or unexpected home repairs, car troubles. But what we've found is that having an emergency fund can help you keep your stress level down, and it keeps you from spending on a whim because it's so hard to build up that emergency fund. You don't want to use it for something that's not really important. The other thing it'll do is it'll help you have flexibility to avoid bad financial decisions. So for instance, our auto insurance renews every 6 months, and we have a couple different choices on how to pay the auto insurance. So we can pay it all up front, we can pay it over 3 months, or we can pay it over 6 months. If we didn't have extra cash, we might get forced into paying it over 6 months, but what you don't realize is that the 6-month payment plan has a pretty high interest rate built in. And even by paying it over a little bit faster over 3 months, we can avoid the extra interest payments and make a better financial decision. Now to get started, just focus on saving $1,000 in the next month. And get creative. $1,000, you could probably find some things sitting around your house you could sell on eBay. Take a side hustle job. There's a lot of creative ways. Maybe it's the next birthday money that you get. Set it aside and build up that $1,000. But long term, the target we would suggest is to have 3 to 6 months of income set aside to cover these kinds of emergencies. So you've got a budget, you're paying off debt, you're building up an emergency fund. You may be wondering, what could derail you? What else could cause you to get off track from the plan? And the reality is that many of us will face various calamities like a health event or some kind of liability risk that could undermine all this hard work. So to reduce the financial risk, make sure that you have adequate insurance in place. And by insurance, we're talking about the whole gamut, everything from health insurance to disability, life insurance, and liability insurance. Two types of risks that often get overlooked are disability and general liability. So with the first one, disability, one thing you may not realize is that more than 1 of 4 of today's 20-year-olds can expect to be out of work for at least a year because of a disabling condition before they reach the normal retirement age. So make sure you cover this risk with the appropriate long-term disability insurance. Liability risk is also something you probably didn't think about when you were in your 20s. But once you begin to accumulate assets, the risk you might be sued goes up in proportion to your net worth. And if you have teenage drivers or own real estate or serve on a board, your liability exposure is even greater, and you may want to consider an umbrella liability policy. The last point I want to make here is that we believe that except for rare situations, insurance should be purchased to cover risks and not as an investment. So when you combine investing with insurance, it usually increases the cost and decreases the transparency of the insurance product. The most common place we see investing and insurance mixed together is with whole life insurance and universal life insurance policies. These can be expensive policies, and they can lock you into something that you might not need in 15 or 20 years. As an alternative, term insurance can be a really low-cost way to make sure your family is protected if a wage earner dies. Let's switch gears to a more fun part of financial planning, saving for your future. One of the easiest ways to do this is to participate in an employer-sponsored savings program. And for most people, that's a 401k. But if you work at a not-for-profit or government agency, you may have access to a 403b plan. If one of those plans is available to you, make sure you take advantage of your employer match. Many companies will match 2, 3, 4, maybe even more percent of your income. So that's free money, and don't miss out on it. But don't stop there. You can contribute up to $19,000 per year, and a good goal is to save between 12 and 15% of your salary. If you're getting an employer match, that might mean you'll need to make an employee contribution of 10 to 12%. Okay, you may be wondering how you're ever going to contribute that much, but one strategy is to commit ahead of time to increase your deferrals each time you get a raise. And if you save the raise before you get used to a higher lifestyle, you're never going to miss the money. Some companies actually have an auto escalation feature, so you can predetermine to increase the amount you defer in future years. So, next year it'll automatically go up by 1% and up another 1% the year after that. To illustrate the power of regularly contributing to your 401k, we've got some examples. We've got 4 different employees that each earn $50,000 per year, and they get a 4% company match. So the first employee contributes 4% of their money starting at age 30, and that plus the match will grow to over $900,000 by age 65. The next employee does a little higher amount, increases it to 6%, and that results in savings of over 1.1 million. The third employee does 8%, and that yields almost 1.4 million. And here 10% generates almost 1.6 million. Here we want to illustrate the importance of starting early. So in this case, Bob waits to age 50 to start contributing, and he only ends up with about $240,000 at age 65. On the other hand, Ann starts contributing at same 4% at age 30, but she ends up with over $900,000 at age 65. In order for Bob to catch up to Ann, he'd have to increase his salary deferrals in his 401k to 27%. That's what you see here in yellow. So the moral of the story is that time is your friend when saving for the future. Besides a 401k, there are other tax advantage accounts that can help you save for your future. Even if you contribute to a 401k, you may be able to access Roth and traditional IRAs or a health savings account. And a health savings account is similar to a flexible spending account, except that you can keep building the balance year after year. You don't have to spend it in the current year. And there's a lot of rules around these types of accounts, but we've just highlighted a few here. But the main idea is take advantage of tax benefits to help you grow your wealth. We often get asked which type of savings accounts should you use first. And in order of preference, I'd recommend that, first of all, you contribute enough to your 401k or 403b to get all the match that's available. Secondly, then, if you have an HSA compatible medical plan and can contribute to a health savings account, that would be your second choice, because you actually get tax benefits when you contribute. The investments grow tax-free, and you can pull the money out tax-free if they're used for medical expenses. Third, I'd contribute to a Roth IRA, especially early in your career, where your tax rate might be lower and your income isn't as high. Then fourth, go back and max out your 401k. So if you've only put in enough to get the employer match, but now you have extra money and can contribute up to that 19,000 limit, max it out. And then finally, especially later in your career, you may want to contribute to a traditional IRA. Now, if you're in your 30s or 40s, I'm guessing you may have kids or you think you might have kids. What many people don't know is that you can start using tax advantage college savings programs like a 529 even before you have children. And so these types of accounts, they give you, in Illinois, if you use an Illinois sponsored program, they give you a state tax deduction, but they also give you the ability to grow your funds free from federal taxation. So you don't get a federal tax benefit when you contribute, but the earnings grow tax-free. And if you set one of these up before you have kids, you can always change the beneficiary at a later date. And as long as you make withdrawals for qualified expenses, qualified education expenses, then the reimbursement that you pull out of the 529 at that point in time is tax-free. One point I'd make here to emphasize is that make sure that you're saving for your retirement first, because you can always borrow to fund college, but you can't borrow for your retirement. Now, once you get going on your investments, it's really important, first that you get started. It's less important how you invest, what particular investments that you choose. We typically recommend that you use diversified funds to get exposure to stocks and bonds. And early in your career, you want to start out more aggressive, so mostly stocks. And when we say mostly stocks, that's probably 70% or more in stocks. The one thing you want to pay attention to, though, is to manage the expenses in your investments. So it's the only thing you control. You don't control whether the markets go up or down, but you can control the expenses in your investments. And then pay attention to your portfolio. So when you leave a job, don't cash out of your 401k. And over time, you may accumulate multiple investment accounts, and to the extent you can, consolidate them into an IRA or into one brokerage account. At some point, your portfolio is going to grow to a point where you may want to get some outside advice. And we'd say, if your portfolio is 1 times your salary, it's worth getting some outside advice to set an investment target that's based on your risk level that you can live with, and that will accomplish your goals. Make sure that you have the right number of funds and the right allocation of those funds, and that new contributions go to the right allocation. And then once a year, you're going to want to rebalance those funds, maybe more frequently if you're working with an advisor and are paying closer attention to it, but rebalance at least once a year. Now, besides just getting a good investment return, there's a number of other things that can help you contribute significantly to your wealth. And Morningstar, which is it's a well-respected independent investment research company, they did a study and identified that getting good advice on how to manage your finances could actually improve your results by almost 2% a year. And they weren't looking at your particular investment results. The factors that they were looking at included what is your asset allocation? So, what's your mix of stocks and bonds and other types of investments? They also looked at your asset location. So certain types of accounts are tax deferred and have tax benefits, and some types of accounts don't have tax benefits. And where you invest in makes a big difference in your long-term wealth. Behavioral coaching was also a big component. To have somebody that helps you not sell when you're nervous about the market, or not jump into Bitcoin when it's trading at $19,000. Having somebody to help you avoid some behavioral mistakes can go a long way in growing wealth. And then when you get to the point where you're pulling money out, it gets really complicated in figuring out how to manage those distributions. So you can do some really efficient strategies around managing those distributions. And good decisions in all of those areas could actually increase your retirement income by 25% or more. One thing you'll want to know is, what are your limits for managing investments? Do you want to hire an advisor, or can you handle it on your own? How much time do you have to put into it? How does investing affect you emotionally? And whether you do it yourself or you have an advisor, you're going to want to have a process for updating and sticking to your plan over time. So life changes, and your plan is going to need to change over time, and you're going to need a way to make sure that you continue to stick to your plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Dale, and we're going to take some questions from the audience.
Thanks, Tim. We do have a few minutes if you'd like to hang around to answer some questions. So to do that, let me just remind you, use the Q&A button on your toolbar. And while you're thinking about it, I also wanted to just mention that any of us at Steward would be happy to talk with you offline if you have some very detailed questions, or if you want to explore one of the topics that's come up today in greater detail. Feel free to reach out to any of us. So we had one question that was submitted at registration, so let me just throw that out first, Tim. And it has to do with annuities. Can you discuss the use of annuities, and particularly index versus variable annuities?
Yeah, so the one thing we found is that annuities are a pretty opaque and complex product, and there is a place for them, but just know that annuities, of all the financial products out there, probably have the highest commissions and highest expenses built into them. Now, there's some places where it makes a lot of sense to use an annuity to manage the risk of living a long time, but you can do that with some pretty simple and straightforward products. And the kind of generally the three types of products out there, there's fixed annuities, where basically you're paying an amount now to get a future monthly income, and it's just a fixed amount every month that you'll get, and that could start immediately or sometime in the future. The second type is an index annuity, and that's where you invest in the annuity, and the performance of the annuity is tied to a specific investment index. And you may participate, 100% in that index or 50% in that index. So, for instance, if the index it's tied to goes up by 10% and you're participating 50%, your annuity balance will go up by 50%, or will go up by 5%. And you may have a floor with that, or a guaranteed income that comes with that. A variable annuity is just a little bit more complex in that you can invest in various funds, kind of like mutual funds, within the annuity wrapper. What I would say is, just generally, the more complex a product gets, the more fees that are in there, and just be careful when you're looking at annuity products to make sure it's something that really makes sense for you.
Okay, we've got one other one, and that has to do, somebody's asking, should someone in the 30s and 40s be banking on Social Security, or is that something that we just don't think is going to be around and they should not consider it part of their plan?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We get that question quite a bit. And just to frame it, the latest Social Security Trust Fund study reported out that the current structure of Social Security, if nothing changes, the Social Security Trust Fund will be depleted in 2034. So that's 15 years from now. The good news is that even when the trust fund is depleted, there will be enough payroll tax coming in to cover about 77% of the old age survivor benefits. That's kind of the typical Social Security benefit that we all expect. So that's kind of the worst case, is that Social Security would still pay out, but it would only be 77% of the normal benefit. Our view is that from a political standpoint, Congress is not going to let Social Security benefits get cut. In fact, there's some congressmen talking about increasing Social Security benefits. So to let it be reduced just would not be politically something that we expect that would happen. And they could do a couple things. One is that they could actually restructure the program so that either benefits are delayed, or there's a higher payroll amount that goes, payroll tax deduction that covers the benefit. So they could restructure the program to fund it. Or even worst case, they could just say, yeah, the program doesn't have enough money, but we're going to pay benefits out of general tax revenues that the government gets. So we're still including it and recommending that it be included in people's financial plans. And it's something as time passes, we'll have more insight into that as well.
Okay, I think that does it. There aren't any more questions out there. So with that, we will end our session. We thank you all for attending. And again, look at our website and keep your eyes open for some more announcements about future topics. Thanks, everyone.